Welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be replacing a toilet fill valve. Some symptoms of a bad fill valve are your toilet constantly makes a humming noise, it might sound like it's constantly running, or it might take a long time for the toilet to refill between flushes. Maybe the flush is weak, or maybe your toilet won't flush at all. These are all common symptoms. You can buy the replacement valve for about $8, and depending on what goes wrong, it'll take you anywhere from 10 minutes to about an hour to replace this, which means it took me roughly an hour. So with that said, let's get started. First thing we're going to do is gather our tools, so grab a bucket and a mop for those wet pliers. With our tools ready to go, we're first going to shut off the water supply of the toilet. If you look behind it on the bottom, there should be one water line coming in with a valve like this. Turn it all the way to the right to turn it off. Then we're going to remove the cap from the fill tank on the back of the toilet. Put this lid somewhere safe and that you won't trip over it constantly during this project. And now we look at the inside of the tank. This big stem here on the left, that is what we are replacing. But to replace it, we first have to get the water out. Now before you do that, look at where the water line is relative to like the scum buildup on the inside of your tank. That sounds so gross. You'll need that relative height later on. And once you've made a mental note of that, flush the toilet, but then keep the handle pressed down. That'll get rid of most of the water right away. But there's still going to be a little bit of water left over at the bottom. You're going to have to empty that out, but you'll need to get a little creative to get it. I used a red plastic cup to try to scoop a bunch of it out, and you can just dump it into the bottom in the actual toilet bowl. You can use an old towel or a mop, so I actually wasn't kidding when I said you could grab a mop for this. Or the other trick I've heard that's effective is using a sponge. Obviously not one that you would ever want to use again on anything else because that would be disgusting, but it does work to soak up all that water. Full disclosure here, I am a huge germaphobe, and just conceptually, toilet tank water is still toilet water in my mind, so I profusely washed my hands at this point. Partially because of the germophobia, but then also because I had to handle my camera, but I would recommend doing it at this point because you gotta dry off your hands anyway to keep working on this. But hey, if you want to power through, that's your choice. That's okay, you do that. With most of the water removed, we are now getting ready to remove the old fill valve. So if you go to the water supply line, you'll see two plastic nuts on the edge of the stem. The first connects the supply line to the stem, and the one on top seals the stem in place into the tank. Going to the inside of the tank, you'll see one on the other end at the base of the stem as well. So the nut inside the tank and the one at the top of the supply line, those basically back out against each other. That's what holds this stem in place. But before we can remove those, we first have to remove the water supply line. So that should twist off. That one was only finger tight in my case. There might be a little bit of water in the supply line, but there shouldn't be a ton. That said, I still try to have the bucket in place to catch everything. If you're in a bit of a pinch, you could use a solo cup or something to try to catch most of it, or the old towel is also an excellent option. Do your best to get any water out of the supply line without dumping it all over your floor. Then we are ready to move on to the plastic nuts that hold the stem in place. There is a rubber gasket between those plastic nuts, so once you start to back those out, you will break the seal at the bottom of this tank, and the water that is left in the tank will start pouring out. So the more time and effort you spent draining out the water at the beginning is going to save you more of a mess now. Gotta be honest, this is the biggest pain in the butt of the whole project. These plastic nuts were stuck on there pretty good from however long they've been sitting. So you can't just twist one off unless you're also holding the other one on the other side. Alright, maybe you'll be able to, I was not able to, but feel free to give it a shot if you want. Now I've got these fat, uncoordinated, stubby hands, so I had difficulty finding a good angle to put my hand inside of the tank while holding pliers in a position that could actually grip the wings on the edge of the nut. And because the other hand was reaching down to the bottom of the tank, I was just at this weird, awkward angle trying to work this. So break out the yoga skills, you might need them here. When you do finally get the nut loose, you obviously want to remove the one that's below the tank because you can't pull that full stem through that small opening. Then I moved the whole stem around like a joystick just to give it a little bit of motion. Again, break any seal that was there. And at that point, it pulled up and out of the tank fairly easily. I threw mine directly into my bucket in case anything else leaked out of it, and also because it's gross and I didn't want to touch it immediately. But don't throw it away quite yet because you do need this before installing the new valve. Reason is the height of that stem is adjustable, so you want to make sure the valve you're putting in is adjusted to the same height as the valve you just took out. Adjusting the height on the new valve is very simple. The black stem that you see here on the bottom is threaded into the gray part, so if you're holding the gray part and you're twisting the black stem clockwise, that's going to make it shorter. if you twist it counterclockwise, that'll unthread it and make it taller. I want to say every full rotation is something like a ½ inch of height. That said, you don't need to have it to like 1/1000th of an inch of the same height, right? Something within roughly 1/4 inch is probably fine. And what I would actually recommend doing is if you put the height a little bit lower, you're going to use less water per flush and you're actually going to conserve water long term. If you're the type of person or type of household that needs all of the water in the flush, don't do that. Very simple. But in my case, it's just me in this household. That wasn't an issue, so I was able to conserve some water and reduce my water bill by doing that, even though it's not a significant amount. If for some reason your old fill valve was not set up properly, the other rule to go by is that the very top of your new one should be about 3 inches over that other tube in your toilet. But once you're happy with the height, most of the toilet valves will have some sort of a locking ring on that stem. You'll feel it kind of click into place. There should be a slot that lines up on the inside. Then this locking ring, you can see me slide down the shaft and that'll go over the end of it, and that'll make sure that the level doesn't change over time for any reason. With that said, there is one more thing we got to do before putting this back in the tank, and that is installing the refill tube with the clip. Really self-explanatory. You got this little nozzle here on the end. You're going to slip the hose over that. Then there's a comparable hose on the edge of your valve. Going to slide it over the edge of that as well. And then you can insert the entire assembly into the toilet, you guessed it, directly where the old one was. Now before you do that, obviously make sure the gasket is on the bottom of the stem. Otherwise you're not going to have anything to seal the water and prevent it from leaking out. You can put that little clip on the other pipe now, or you can do that later. It really doesn't matter as long as you do it before you close the toilet back up. And then start tightening up that plastic nut on the bottom of the tank to secure it into place. Now you shouldn't need to over tighten these. I had a lot of difficulty getting mine off. I think mine was way over tightened by whoever did this previously. Hand tight is usually more than enough. Just like when we had the leaking faucet repair, you're dependent on the gasket to create the seal rather than the amount of torque that you're putting into this thing. Let the gasket do its job. I promise you it's going to work. And do the same thing with the supply line. Again, don't need to over crank it. And if you're worried about leaks, you can also put plumber's tape on this as well. If you're looking at it from the top down, you have to wrap the plumber's tape around counterclockwise. If you're looking at it bottom up or end on, you wrap the plumber's tape around clockwise. If you didn't put the clip into the tube earlier, you got to do that now, and then you are ready to turn your water supply on and check for leaks. Now, because it might be leaking, do not just go cranking that thing all the way open. Open it a little bit at first, maybe a quarter, a half turn, and slowly open it more and more until you can hear the water flowing. If this thing is leaking, especially if it's leaking out of the supply line, you are going to see it pretty quickly. Mine sprayed all over the back wall behind my toilet almost immediately. This should go without saying, but shut off your water as quickly as you notice it, because you gotta fix that. That's bad. I don't know why I have to say that, but hey, it's the internet and one of you is somehow gonna mess that up. A leaking supply line is one of the most common issues that you'll get after replacing this fill valve, so there's a few ways to address this. If you have a minor leak, you might be able to just add the plumber's tape to the threads, but for what I have here, you can tell plumber's tape was not gonna fix this. In my case, the new valve that I put in was a little bit shorter lengthwise than the old one, so it was kind of stretching the supply line, which was already at the end of its limits. It was making the supply line go in at a little bit of a weird angle, and it wasn't creating a good seal. The next option is to replace the supply line itself and to put in a longer one. That's actually fairly simple to do. You have to unbolt the supply line from the shutoff valve, then you thread in the new one, and again, plumber's tape is a pretty good idea here. Now, I did not want to make another trip to the hardware store, so I was trying to get creative, but that would have been probably the best answer. But what I ended up doing, and I am definitely giving myself points for creativity, is I made a new Frankenstein valve using the parts that I had. And by that I mean I took the threaded black stem out of both valves and I swapped them. So I knew that the old valve was not leaking at that junction and that that part of the stem was long enough to reach the current hose. And because they're both the same diameter, it fit in perfectly to the new valve. The upper portion of the valve is what controls the filling, and if the toilet is running when it shouldn't be, that is also controlled by the upper portion of the valve. So for me, the part that wasn't working, we're still using the new bits, and the part that wasn't working on the new bit, we're gonna use the old bit. Yeah, that's my evil creation for the day, but I'm also swapping over the new gasket at the bottom of the tank because my old one looked pretty beat up and I don't trust that nearly as much to make a good seal. So in my mind, having a supply line that is exactly the correct length on the old valve but not on the new valve is like a really oddly specific issue to have. But hey, if you have the same problem, feel free to try this. Doesn't hurt, right? Either way, reinstall the Frankenstein valve, turned on the water, there were no leaks, and the toilet functioned perfectly. And actually, I did this about a year ago at this point, and I still have no leaks and no problems whatsoever. So this has held up to the test of time, although admittedly I was skeptical myself when I was first doing this. Before you put the cover back on the tank, do a final check for leaks, especially at the base of the stem below the tank. Give yourself a quick test flush, make sure everything's functioning properly. And also, remember that part at the start of the video where I said to check where the water line was relative to the scum marks on the inside? Make sure the water level is about the same level that it was before. You can fine tune it a little bit using this knob here. Again, it's not rocket science here. You're not calculating it for NASA. If it visually looks close enough, it's probably going to be fine as long as your toilet is functioning properly. If you're happy with how it functions, you are ready to close this project. So go ahead and get that lid back on the top, clean up your tools and put everything away, and then chug bleach to cleanse your soul so you don't feel so disgusting. Alright, maybe not that last part, but do wash your hands. That'd be good. And with that pleasantry, hopefully this helps you out. Thank you guys for watching, and I will see you next time.